for this. Do we want to do introductions to start off? Okay, so I'm Karis Lustig. I'm the Director of Public Works.
Alex Klee, Assistant Town Planner.
I'm Justin McCullen. I'm here as a representative from the Traffic Safety Committee, formerly the Traffic Management Advisory Committee.
Mo Handel here as a resident.
Tim Bolger, President at Large.
Paul Malta, President as well.
Shane Mark, I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works.
Ray Hoyland, Highway Superintendent.
So we figured the first meeting would really be sort of introductory, not getting into any of the, specifics of the charge of the committee and what we want to focus on in the next year, but kind of giving an overview of what we currently do in DPW and what we currently have planned. We think we have some systems and plans that are really functional, and we want to kind of continue to memorialize those and present those to the committee, and then really think about over the next year, what are the types of items that we would like to create more standardization on and more clarity on. Right now, essentially every time we deviate from the existing right of way, we go to the select board and present, which has been helpful from a public information and transparency perspective. But as we get into more and more transitions and what our roadways look like, it's going to become cumbersome. So creating some standardized policies and procedures will be helpful. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you as our departing highway superintendent to kind of give an overview of the systems that we have built over the past 20 years that you've been working with the town.
Sure, thank you. So in the 90s, it was a very informal process when I got here, and I came from vertical construction. Vertical construction, and the background was to know all the assets, what the life cycles are in buildings, and develop plans, capital plans, maintenance plans. So we started doing cores to verify why are the roads so bad. We did an inventory, condition inventory. It was in the high 50s. High 50s is not acceptable to any town. We were doing full reconstruction, putting all the money into full reconstruction, being pulverize the road, engineering, design it, pulverize it, reshape it, do the drainage, sidewalk, curbing, handicap ramps, a lot of engineering design and supervision money. So it costs about 10 times what maintaining a road with asphalt would be to do it properly. So most of the money went into reconstruction and then surface treatments, which are, we did chip seals, the thing that a lot of people are annoyed with. So we spray the road with emulsion, put chips on it, they kind of roll it, sweep it, it holds roads together. So those were the two primary focuses. In 2020, we went to the board and asked for $1 million. And we did all the background homework. We did cores townwide, all the main roads, looked at what the substructure was, and found that a lot of residential streets did not require reconstruction. They just required asphalt pavement. So shape it, put a structural base on it, and let it go. It's about 1/10 the cost. So we moved in that direction. And we've developed a 20-year plan plus. So within about 14, 15 years after you pave a road and restructure it, it starts to get to the deterioration stage. So at that point, the plan was to do a surface treatment. And most of the Bay State Roads training, they do all the training for state, municipal, statewide out of Amherst University. We're promoting rehabilitate, surface treat, has diminishing returns. We looked at that model and decided that we would go with rehabilitation, surface treat, rehabilitation. There's all kinds of reasons for that. So we adapted the policy to get the maximum cost benefit out of our infrastructure and bring it back up. So we went after all the main roads first in 20 years ago. Main roads first, so we milled and paved, had curbing, had some sidewalks, did not reconstruct, in-house engineering, working with our divisions, and we were getting about 10 miles for what we got for 1 mile of reconstruction, and really accelerated the program. And in 15 years, we got up to just about 80%. 80% is the industry standard for road surface conditions. for ratings. And so that's where we are today. And currently in the last 5 to 7 years, at that 20 to 30 to 40-year plan, we're doing more surface area with surface treatments than actually paving. So we haven't needed to drastically ask for increased budgets. We've been able to maintain that budget level without going up. Currently, that saves about, if we did all asphalt paving, about 1.1 million to 1.2 million by having that mix.
When you say a percentage, that's a percentage of,
Surface area.
Perfect.
Surface area.
so when we were at a rating of 50%, what does that mean to?
Oh, that rate, that's a different, so that rating is back 20 years ago, it was not computerized. So there's a form. So people would drive it, a driver and a scorer, and you'd break out the sections and they would rate the condition of the roadway, the surface. And it would and then put that into a computer, it spit out a number. And the general rating town-wide was 58%.
So it's like a D, is that what, it's like a
Oh,
grade?
D, yeah, bad D,
Okay,
which at that point costs a lot to try to push back up. So that's the road surface condition rating. Currently, the other surface, what we're doing is doing more surface by yard or by mile, however you want to convert the units in surface treatments, and that was the plan. So it actually carried out. So that's where we are today. On the sidewalk plan, most people, if they've been here a long time ago, with the town in the 90s also developed a sidewalk plan. And that was titled in the capital book, School Walking Routes. The school walking route was developed by the safety committee, which was the school transportation and the police mainly, knowing with the children with more walkability. And that plan was developed. We did about 55 miles of sidewalk that we plow in the winter. The capital program back in the 90s when it started only focused on school walking routes. So that's almost 1/3 of the town. The rest of the town, there was no plan. Eventually, about 10 years ago, we shifted to include town-wide into the capital budget. And the school walking routes are basically 99% completed and all the main roads. So in the future, where we're going to go is the residential streets, and that's going to be very challenging. I've been promoting and talking about this for years, is hopefully this committee will help develop policies and matrix of how we go into the residential streets by people, how many people are walking, biking, how many vehicles, with different intentions and vision to how we go forward. And those represent about 80 miles of roadway, a lot of trees that are in the way. It's going to be a big challenge going forward for Needham. That's probably the biggest challenge, is the sidewalk infrastructure.
and then if I may ask another question, at one point, we were reducing the number of sidewalks.
That's under consideration. We haven't really formally did that, but that is part of what I would say is a consideration for Needham to do, especially in residential streets where you have low traffic volumes, low speeds. They were constructed with sidewalks on both sides, especially post-World War II or even pre. There's a lot of trees that would have to be clear cut. So the town may go into these low volume, traffic volume streets and reconstruct one side, remove the other side. There's a lot of benefit to that. We believe there's about 40
But we never
miles.
did it, we were just talking
No, we're
about it.
just discussing,
Okay.
and that will be the policy moving forward if adopted by this group and DPW.
Thanks.
Mhm. In talking to a lot of residents, when we go do construction with sidewalks or do roadways, what I usually do is walk around and people want to know what's going on and ask a lot of questions. So I give a lot of that information out about sidewalks. If we're doing the roadway, when are you going to do the sidewalks? So I have that conversation with them that we're about 80 miles in the rears, which is over $20 million. At current rate, we'd never catch up of spending rate. So that's a 30+ year backlog. By reducing the sidewalk, we could cut that in half, is projected. I don't know what the number is, but it's significant. And also with a little extra funding and not doing as much granite, we do granite on main drags, of course, to separate and have a separation barrier. So we would be able to do with the same budget, more miles of sidewalk. So you can almost get it down to a 10-year backlog and then prioritize how you do the matrix of how to prioritize. Because when we go into the neighborhood streets, everybody, I believe, is going to want it at the same time.
In the configuration of like single sidewalk, with that sidewalk, is one of the actions to determine, I think I saw like the appropriate width, like would that width change if you're now?
We have to be compliant with Architectural Access Board, that's the state governance bureaucracy. And the Americans with Disabilities is the federal, they both have,
Okay,
it's kind of like building codes.
got it.
It's very strict. So sidewalk is all handwork. Per foot, it's quite expensive. It's
Okay.
more expensive than paving a roadway. And we have to put in compliant ramps. And in doing so, a lot of drain work at intersecting streets with those ramps go. Granite is in detail.
Sorry, you can't do both sides.
We have such a significant backlog that if we were to do both sides, we'd either, so I think this is sort of the idea of what this committee can kind of talk about, right? So right now we have a program that Ryan's outlining that will never catch up to where we need to be just based on the funding levels. So you have a couple different options, right? One is you can do both sides and ask for more money and get it, and then do both sides and sort of try to increase the amount of road that we're able to do on an annual basis. Or we can cut back our inventory to something that's more manageable, right? So those are kind of the two options. And one of the things we've seen in some of these neighborhoods is there is such a low volume of traffic at all times of day that it wouldn't be unreasonable for somebody to cross the street to get to a safe sidewalk as opposed to having a sidewalk adjacent to their property. And there are so many impediments in most of these neighborhoods to getting a full legal sidewalk on both sides of the road that if you remove one of those, you're also restoring that area. So you no longer have to take down trees or deal with the right of way. And now you're just working on focusing on making it together, making one road that complies. The advantage of that is you would want to have a better network of crosswalks and other things to sort of create this interconnected network under the complete streets principle. So it doesn't mean you have to have sidewalk on both sides, but you shouldn't have sidewalk that just ends and then there's no sidewalk connectivity off of it, which is what we also have in some areas. And we also have areas, we have a no added sidewalk policy because we're so far behind right now in our maintenance of our existing sidewalk that it would really be unfair to those who have existing sidewalk that doesn't meet code or isn't really walkable. To add more, we'd like to get to a place where we can add sidewalk to those unconnected neighborhoods, but we feel that we feel the best way to do that would be to reduce the inventory. Unless for some reason town meeting says, you know what, we want to give $5 or $6 million annually towards sidewalk maintenance, in which case then that might be an option where we wouldn't have to reduce inventory. But right now we're asking for just under $1 million for our sidewalk work, and that's getting us about 1.5 miles for the dollars. So there's no clear answers. There's just a bunch of things that we're we feel like at our level, we don't have a lot of answers on yet. And so we're looking to this committee to help us create some policies to make it clearer about what we want to do. Do we want to ask for more money? Do we want to change our approach? How do we prioritize? Those are things we haven't answered yet on sidewalks.
And I think it's a combination. I think, there are streets in this town that have sidewalks on both sides and have maybe 25 cars a day. But then there's like Mark's Tree, which has a sidewalk only on one side. It has for decades and really can't because of the amount of blasting that would need to be done on that street because of the underground topography.
Yes.
You know, it's just, so I'm not advocating for putting another sidewalk, but there are trees that are there are roads that are minor collectors that only have one sidewalk. And then we have, small little ones that have dual, and 146 miles, 144 miles of sidewalk is to me is not sustainable as a town with our budget and our future financial considerations of schools and overrides, et cetera. But I think we need to kind of find a way that we can, there's equity issues as well here, because where do you start? You give sidewalk to areas in town that are, don't have any, obviously Kara said there's a moratorium on that right now, but there are areas that have higher cost per square foot, let's just say, in houses, and so there, you know, do we start there, so I think equity needs to be part of the conversation for how we come up and develop a policy for how we're gonna go forward.
And there's are some exceptions to what Kara said with adding new sidewalk, for example, along that line with the equity. Just along St. Mary's this past summer, there was no sidewalk connection from the Needham Housing Authority up to Central
Yes.
where the bus stop is. So Rye had a contractor go in and fixed all the sidewalk that needed to be repaired and made the connections the rest of the way. So now, if you live in the Needham Housing Authority, you have a continuous sidewalk all the way up to Central to get to the bus stop there or to get along
Mhm.
Central. So there are some exceptions
Yeah.
to that rule.
Yeah.
But we have been in just our normal process of DPW with every project we're looking at is talking about equity and how we can include the DEI elements into the work
I
that
agree with that too.
we do as a whole.
Two other issues. One is environmental. The more paving we have, more runoff issues, less environmental responsibility in my view. And secondly, not everybody wants a new sidewalk in front of their house. That reduces their lawn. In some cases, that can be quite extreme for some properties.
Mhm.
So those all have to be considered when we're making these plans.
Yeah. And I think that's why we're looking at the committee to help us make some of those decisions and recommendations. Because we've talked about it internally, when we do get into neighborhoods, like Bryce said, is, you know, what neighborhoods do we focus on first? Or do we have a policy where if a neighborhood would come to the town and say, we're willing to get rid of sidewalk on one side of the street, do we prioritize that neighborhood over another? So there's a lot of factors that'll go into this that we're really counting on the committee to help us prioritize in some of those decisions, especially with, to Rye's point, with having a 20-year backlog of where do we go first? Do we go oldest to newest? Or where should we be focusing so that we can all have a clear, concise message for the residents and for how we make
May I ask
decisions?
for clarification on an issue that came up at town meeting? Which was one of the neighbors of Chestnut, Central and Charles River Street was complaining about the lack of crosswalk and or sidewalk. I couldn't quite.
So this came up to TMAC as well. So it's central at Charles River. Right now, Ryan just added sidewalk that connects to that intersection. There was no sidewalk there before. So we don't add crosswalks where there is no sidewalk because we want people to then be able to move safely walking across once they get past the crosswalk. So that's one of the reasons why the crosswalk hasn't been there. And then right now, there's only crosswalk at one of the four legs of the intersection. So the idea would be when we get into the future and we have a clear policy on when we add sidewalk, we would implement that policy and then we would add a crosswalk afterward.
So that's on the sort of future list to
Yes.
resolve. Yeah, thanks.
Have we looked at what other towns are doing? This is probably not a unique problem, given I think it was a lot of this is engineering from the 40s, 50s, 60s, you know, standard traffic, old school traffic engineers. This is what you do when you do a suburban road in a certain neighborhood. Have we looked at what other towns are doing in terms of their sidewalk inventory and trying to call that down or any
Yeah,
ideas?
so good point. So I've done a lot of search, a lot of outreach with Bay State Roads. It's connected to most of the towns. Concord started to do what we're talking about years ago and kind of stalled. So they changed it and focused only on crosswalks. Where do you put RFBs? Where do you build, better crossings? And backed off of the sidewalk. So I'm not aware of anybody, a lot of towns are talking about it. So Needham would be the lead on this level.
Do we know why Concord stopped? Was it a political, was it?
I think it was
a-
somewhat political.
Okay.
Also, it became COVID. This was back in 2019 when I got the documents I have upstairs. So I think it was a combination of COVID, losing momentum, also without doubt, political. It's gonna take courage to develop new policies. Everybody has an opinion, as we know, but town-wide, with the vision that Kara Shane, engineer, and I've talked to, and other communities, that that's a smart way to proceed. The 20-year backlog with the increase in cost post-COVID is significantly more. I think our numbers went up 45% of cost. So we're looking way beyond a 30-year current dollar value. So the backlog is even worse than was written about in the 2017, 2018 memo by Beta.
Yep.
That categorized what our rates are. We did a full inventory back in 17, 18
Mhm.
with a private company on the sidewalks townwide.
What's
I
our,
would,
A rapid rectangular flashing beacon. Oh, I'm
Ah.
sorry. Those are the,
Where you push
lights.
that.
Yeah.
to-
Thank
I
you.
would add, the only community I know that is doing an active sidewalk removal program is Franklin. And they're doing it primarily under their stormwater and NIPD's program. So they're doing it to get credit. If you remove permeable surface, you get additional credits as part of NIPD's. The other community I did talk to a little bit before forming this committee was Lexington. We did have a chat. They have a lot of individuals who by petition will put new sidewalk on town meeting warrant. So they'll add every so often like $1 million or $1.5 million worth of sidewalk. Unfortunately, there's no long-term maintenance plan as part of that. So if it gets added and town meeting does support it, the DPW executes it, but they don't have a way of baking that into their long-term maintenance plan.
And I can,
Maybe we should.
From- from the former position I was in as a streets director in the town next door there. In Newton, I can tell you, this is a major issue for every city, is maintaining its infrastructure, especially its sidewalk infrastructure. In Newton, I was telling Ryan and I were having this conversation earlier today, but they have basically a multifaceted approach. They would install new sidewalks for connectivity focused around schools and high walking areas. And then as part of their roads program, they just accepted the fact that if they did the rehabilitation, which was basically a cold plain overlay or anything above a chip seal, they would do curb, sidewalk, and street all in one package, as opposed to the way we do it here. So of course, the costs get driven up by that, and it's less mileage that you can get on the roadways with the funding source. The street maintenance staff at the time, which was the staff that I managed, our 311 system, we had over 3,000 sidewalk service requests throughout the city. And we were at least 15 to 16 years deep, where we would go out there and do it with our own staff and get as much sidewalk as we can get done in the summer. And then we also had a contract that they would put a certain dollar amount. They would say $80,000, hire a contractor in to go after this area and just complete as many of those service requests as possible up to that threshold. So it was a multifaceted approach, but Newton definitely is not a community that was talking about removing strategic removal of sidewalks. So it's actually a brilliant idea that we're talking along these lines, especially to your point, Mo, with climate and Karis's point with NIPD's. This will definitely help us with climate action plan. And I think also with NIPD's credits and stormwater control and runoff to allow some more green space to capture these rain events that we've been having.
No, I mean, I'm all for the idea of what talked about with rain with TMAC, that it's, and one thing that TMAC or TSC has given me a perspective over the last 8 years is all the pain points in the town, just because that's, we are the committee that people complain to. And so we do know where everyone says there's no sidewalks, so there's no crosswalks, so there's no, and it is to the point where I think we need to think strategically about reducing that inventory so that we can then increase it in certain areas that would be of higher need for whatever it is, a DEI concern, a school concern, someone with a disability. And then decrease it on some of these roads that there's no reason to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. So I'm in support of being able to kind of help to, steer that strategic plan.
A lot of the towns in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even in the 70s, and the planning boards, when neighborhoods were being constructed, wanted sidewalk on both sides. Some towns did, of course, Sherburne, Dover, They were outliers. So they have very little inventory. Some towns did, and when I lived in Millis, they were doing the same thing. When I moved to Millis years ago, I was gonna go on the planning board with Brutus, who's the director in Franklin, that Karis mentioned. And the thought was, the contractor is paying for it, the developer, put them on both sides. The real thought should be, do you really need it? Because it becomes a future liability in terms of cost and claims when you're not maintaining it. The courts are starting to rule against municipalities, even though there's a cap. By being dysfunctional and not having a plan, used to be the towns could hide behind that. That's not happening anymore. You have to be compliant, you have to be responsive. So this would accelerate that. And I think that by developing this plan that we have in theory and on paper, and with this committee, Needham will be in a unique position to have a plan that others would model. Because a lot of towns are, as mentioned, and have this problem. And politically, most of them don't want it. They keep pushing it down, kicking the can down the road. And I'm hoping that Needham chooses to address it and then execute a plan to reduce.
Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about bike lanes and where we are with that, as far as like we didn't really put any bike lanes on our property until 2020, and that's when we started our process, and kind of how we've been managing that? We sort of have a plan, we sort of don't, and just maybe explain where we're currently at with that.
Sure. So Needham has signed on to Complete Streets, which is multimodal. It's for all users of all abilities. So you're talking bicycles, walkers, pedestrians, and vehicles, and not focus so much on the vehicles, the walkers and the bicyclists, which I fully support. A lot of communities are on board with that. So what Needham started to do, and it didn't do, it was just part of Needham's policy and approach in the past, was to focus on vehicle traffic until really about 10 years ago. And bicycle and adding safe bike, either separated or at least the 5-foot minimum marked bike lanes, and other features to include bicycles. Network townwide is critically important, is on higher lists. So it's walkers and cyclists. Vehicles are vehicles. We're trying to pull those lanes in, use traffic calming measures, either hard fixes by curbing, making it feel tighter, putting grass plots in, stormwater runoff, but also to make it more of a village, aesthetically more pleasing. And studies show that operators of vehicles tend to slow down a little bit. They're more aware and put in these other bike features. So we've been extending that quite a bit. We've done it down Central Avenue, basically from Honeywell. We should do it as a community wherever we can, is to incorporate complete street designs for better pedestrian safety and aesthetics, as well as bicyclists, and truly go multimodal.
I have noticed driving around the region lately that there's a lot more bus lane exclusivity, except when you get to the intersection. That would probably be on our list as well, because we have bus routes, right?
We do. I haven't looked deep into that.
The
Yeah,
concern I have is if somebody who hasn't known about it is, when you first encounter it, you don't know where you can
Yeah.
be. So I find it very.
the main bus that we have is 59 route,
Right.
and the route that it takes, we don't have the space to do a dedicated lane, and because it comes through Newton, down Central Ave, goes up to Webster, comes down Webster to,
We don't have anything that
to
wide.
Highland, and then down Highland in front of the library, all the way to Junction, and then it loops back around. And so for those, I don't think we could do that, for the fact that you just don't have the space to get a dedicated lane, like in Cambridge, or what you're seeing in
But
downtown
the
Boston
takeaway for
area.
me is, how do you educate the public so they don't happen on this and then don't know what to do? Not just the bike, I mean, the bus, but bike changes.
With all the amenities we'd look to
Right,
do,
because,
yeah.
I mean, simple things like I noticed recently on the highway, the exit indicator, I had no idea what it was when I encountered it. I never was aware that there was a change in that. I don't even know how long they've been doing it. So I
Oh,
think,
it's the dotted line.
yeah,
Yeah, so you could, okay.
so it's practical and it works, but there isn't broad public information about it on a local level when we're making all of these adjustments. We need to be very mindful that the average person may not encounter it except first time on the road.
Agreed, and as we incorporate what we're talking about on complete streets. So I was looking at the MassDOT book today, I was gonna bring it down, it's huge on how do you do programs. There's very little about, there is areas in the design stage and construction, public meetings have to be held, those kind of things.
Right.
A small little section, a couple paragraphs, right? that has
And
to
most
be
of the
done.
public don't go to those.
Yes, and so how do we, as Needham and this committee, I think we're really good, DPW is very good at construction. That's what we do, done it all my life, vertical and then this, but that outreach and that extra level of sophistication.
Yeah.
That's where we need help, in my view, and whoever's sitting here in the future, because the political charge that can take place is to help the committee define the policies, look at the vision with DPW and get that out to the public so that, because I feel once they know exactly what we're doing, it's all logical, it makes sense. These are the best business practices. And there's new designs coming forward, and how that could also be a charge of this committee by having those conversations. It's taped with communication director we have, is to push this information out. 'Cause there's a lot of good news.
MAPC has some skill at community outreach and these issues as well. So it might be worthwhile linking with their staff to get some advice on how to accomplish some of these
Right.
goals.
I mean, I think I agree with the outreach. I think in specific with the dotted lines, but the problem is you only look at driver's ed once when you're 16, and that's part of the driver's ed curriculum is the how to actually merge and how the
Right.
markings and the,
But
you know, et
they've
cetera.
changed.
But no, exactly. So it's incorporated in the new driver's ed. You know, you
Right.
go into, and kids are now seeing that you can actually go into that, what was the breakdown lane, the dotted, dashed line and all that. But they don't actually do it for people who have been driving for years and decades. And that's something that, who, is it the state? Is it that, this is a new Commonwealth of Massachusetts markings, change in paradigm, the zipper lane, as well, the new merging in.
Right.
Yes, and I think we could
But there's a
outreach. but-
local equivalent in
Correct.
terms of the stuff we're gonna be.
I mean, we're gonna be incorporating, I think, designs that are at the state. We're not coming up with Needham's own markings. We just need to I agree that we need to kind of do the outreach of we're gonna be applying markings that are standards in the state, and this is how we do it. Perhaps with the police can do outreach where they're reaching, some never before seen metrics with their Facebook, and their public outreach. DPW could as well. There could be sessions, et cetera. So it's whatever the output of this is.
Right.
I agree that it's a central tenet of what we need to do in order to help. Once we come with something, we need to educate people.
Right.
Agreed.
And that's a great point, Mo, is how do we reach the people that aren't tuned into the local government? That don't watch the Needham channel or,
95% of the people.
so how do we reach that market? That's a great point. I made a note here as we think about this.
But the Safe Streets for All grant, with the highway, National Highway, they have funding for outreach and, just getting it to people, so maybe worth looking at.
So we would look at some mailings as well, or stuffing them with water bills, those kind of things, a vision, where we're
I
going.
certainly wouldn't put down any idea, but my sense is that most people don't look at what comes with the water bill or the
Oh,
real
boy.
estate tax. They just look at the bill.
We can work with any of our local
But,
papers.
Karis, you were gonna say
we
something?
do now have.
I was gonna
local-
say, I think that's the challenge, is not necessarily just the funding source, but we talk about this on a whole plethora of platforms on how to have those conversations, and feels like it's very difficult to have those conversations and like there's no one method of reaching people. And in fact, it used to be, right? Like the mailer and everyone opened up their mail and it wasn't an issue. And now, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. And so, right, it's like it's not newspapers, people aren't reading newspapers, it's social media, but some people are connected in and some people aren't, and some people are on different platforms. So certainly could bring Amy in on a future meeting and we could have a whole conversation on how to promote communication as far as changes that we make. I will say the method we've used going to the select board to talk about some of the restriping issues, some of the right-of-way changes that we've done on West Street, Central, Greendale, and other locations has resulted in almost no pushback, which is kind of interesting. So even though that's sort of a really low-key way of doing public information, going to a select board meeting, being on their agenda, potentially having it reported on, we haven't had pushback for anything that we have put in front of that group, even though we've made fairly significant changes. And we've also been doing a lot of one-on-one meetings with neighborhoods. So we did a large project recently at Fox Hill at Webster, and that was a significant change in the right-of-way, a narrowing of the road, an improvement of the intersection. And again, we went there, I would say of the people that showed up, there were probably over 20. One person wasn't like thrilled about it, but just kind of accepted it. And the other 19 were excited. So we have found some very positive one-on-one kind of old school conversations. And so that's what we're trying to figure out when we should bake that into our plan too, because if we're making 20 changes a year, that may not be possible to do with every neighborhood. But if we're doing it in like a smaller neighborhood or an area where it's a pretty dramatic change, we could certainly figure out where to prioritize those conversations. So with that, I'm thinking, Ryan, should we transition to the capital plan for this year?
Sure.
So I'll just give a quick overview. The town, over a decade ago, decided to prioritize its Chapter 90 funding for a downtown renovation project. The first phase of that was completed, and we're currently working on our second phase. It is likely, based after talking to the select board and the town manager, that we may use other funding as well as Chapter 90, so it may not just be a Chapter 90 project. Typically speaking, Chapter 90 funds are used for most towns, roads, and sidewalk programs. Needham has chosen to fund those programs internally. So we have our own infrastructure funding that we have used over the past decade to fund the roads. Right now, with the exclusion of Chapter 90, we still reserve the right if for whatever reason we've asked for, I think this year we're asking for 3.5 million altogether. If we cannot get the full 3.5 million from the town's budget for whatever reason, we intend to go to Chapter 90 for that delta in order to keep our projects on track. That's a change in the last 2 years over the years prior. One of the pressures we've been hearing from the state is that they keep on wanting to increase the amount of money they give to towns, but a lot of towns are doing what Needham's doing and they're holding on to it and not spending it. So it's hard for them to allocate money when towns then aren't spending that money. So we are trying to figure out how to spend down that money a little bit more quickly so we can hopefully incentivize the legislature and the governor to increase that amount over time. As Ryan has talked about, the significant increase we've received in contract pricing, there has not been such a significant increase in our Chapter 90. So what we do is we put forward a 5-year capital plan for this project. It is exclusive, or for the purposes of this committee, it's exclusively in the infrastructure article, which contains a whole host of infrastructure improvements. Some are in the roadway, some are not. And Ryan will talk a little bit about what's in the roadway and what our plan is. We do not lock ourselves into a actual road list as part of our capital request because there are so many things that happen throughout the year that change our priority. This year, I think 7 or 8 roads got knocked off of our list because Eversource decided to come in at right before our paving and do some gas main work. So that changed our priorities. And then also sometimes what happens in the winter, certain roads degrade a little faster than others. So with that, Ryan, do you just want to present our capital plan right now as it stands?
Sure. Without the detail.
Yeah, just a high level view.
So we look out decades as in theoretical, which is appropriate, but we have a hard capital plan that we put together. We use the Beta Engineering study book, cost benefit, and the ratings to look at worse roads and clusters of roads for maintenance, repair, and paving. So we have a 5-year pavement rehabilitation plan It's all years are over $1 million. So every penny we get, we try to spend it as quickly as possible. And as Kara said, there is disruption. Usually it's a gas company because they're doing a lot of pipe, always have, but especially in the past few years. So we have those plans. They're all clustered by scale of economy. So we take out whole neighborhoods. Back in the 90s, we would do little pieces everywhere. My brain can't handle that. And the people don't, because we keep coming in and do little pieces. In the market, that's very expensive. So contractors, we've gotten our prices down. We do everything by scale. And so most of these are clustered of neighborhoods and sections of main roads. So when you go into a neighborhood, our staff prepares it, does all the edging. That's very expensive in the private side. They want to come in and pave, do utilities, that's it. And so our staff does most of the prep work, a lot of the loom and seed, post pavement with Cape Cod berm. And those are the hard 5-year capital plans that we have. And we also have it for the sidewalk. And on the sidewalk, I really have it pretty loose. So it's really this is really a 3-year plan, knowing that this committee's coming. We've done most of the school walking routes, so I could do one side and be safe because I was covered under that policy. So that as we look forward, the DPW would start going into neighborhoods would be about 3 years out, actually not 5. I didn't want to overstack it and not sure where they're going to go. We also have the surface treatment 5-year plan, so that's currently what Needham was using is called the micro pave. We do it on main roads that have a very solid foundation. It's more brittle. It's a cement-based product. When it goes down, it looks like asphalt pavement. We've done it on Central Ave. We've done it on Great Plain Ave, High Rock, most of our roads that were engineered. Local roads, we were using a rubber chip seal. We got away from the latex, very durable. That product technically says it goes 10, 12 years. I've seen it go 20 years. It holds the roads together. It seals it. It's 20% crumb rubber, recycled rubber with a chip. It's still annoying to people because of the sweeping the first year or two, and it's rough for about 2 or 3 years. After about 3 years, it looks like an asphalt road when the plows wear it down in the traffic. So that's the 2 products that we use for surface treatment, the rubber chip and then the micro. We had a failure with rubber chip this past season. For some reason, it didn't solidify and harden up. It got tracked by vehicles. It happened in the Countryway area. We're negotiating with the contractor. They've been in town for like 40 years that have pretty much a monopoly on that kind of those surface treatment products in New England to make a repair. So we hope to do that next year. We did not do any rubber chip last year, and we're talking about replacing it with a different product that we think people would like more. It's not a rubber chip. It's and Shane has experience with it and doing a bonded wearing course is to actually switch gears if local roads flex a lot. So it's either asphalt pavement, micro is not a good option. And I think that's what we're looking to switch over so the public, the citizen, more supportive of the product for maintenance.
And we're also just looking at different tools. So all these different treatment types are just tools in the toolbox. No one treatment type is right for every roadway here in Needham. Over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been new processes in pavement rehabilitation. There's a process called hold in place. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there are a lot of cities and towns using that. It's a big machine that goes and it grinds the roadway, rejuvenates the pavement, puts the pavement right back down all in one stretch, and then you come over top of it and you do a micro surface or a different type. All these different types of treatments are less costly than if you would have to go in and do a cold plane and overlay on the streets. So what we're really looking at currently, and we'll be focusing with our new Director of Streets and Transportation, is adding different tools into our toolbox and using those tools in different areas throughout the town and making sure that we're using as many resources as we can to stretch our dollar, but also to make the roadway last longer. You've probably all heard, the rubber chip just residents don't like the rubber chip. It's a rough ride. It's a great product, but it's a rough ride until it wears in. So there's some other things we're looking at doing that'll a little bit more expensive, but accomplishes the same task. So those are some of the things that Rain's talking about, and that's all in conjunction with the complete streets as well, is just using those tools and using the right tool at the right time.
Right. So what we're looking at is, before I leave, and whoever's here, to look at those specifications and help write those, put those together so the town can put it out later this winter and have those tools ready to go next year. So I think, as a town, as a community, we may be moving away from the rubber chip. The rubber chip has worked terrific, but we did have a failure, so and outcry. So we're looking at other options of tools, other methods out there on the maintenance side. It's all budget driven. Since I've been here, I've been known to always advocate for the infrastructure. Always asking for money, and not just to ask, but to get to certain goals that make sense on the cost benefit side and the life cycle costing to push it out. I think Needham's been terrific with funding those programs. And when I've asked for more, if they wanted to get away from the surface treatments, it's another $1.1 million currently, theoretically. And the answer is just keep doing what you're doing, keep the budgets on track. And that's a lot of money for the community. So in 10 years, you're looking at 11, 12 million, just if you switched from surface treatments back to all asphalt, never mind what's going on with the sidewalks, on how we approach that. So my job has always been to try to get the best return for the money, for the taxpayers, you know, like it or not. And that was a tough road because a lot of people are dissatisfied with some of the products, but they do work.
Does anyone have any questions on our capital plan? So I provided everybody a very brief list of just sort of items that we were looking for in DPW for clarity from this committee. Items that we think aren't working exactly the way that they are, and we would like some clarity, or items where we are going to the board every time we're implementing a new process, and we think we should have a process, a clear procedure or policy in place. So I provided this list on how we work with residents and we plan out our future changes to our streets, some complete streets principles, and really should we be implementing them with a clear policy, so that when we do make a change, we don't have to go and talk to the board or talk to the residents. It's, you know, we have 10-foot lanes is our standard in this particular way. You know, a sidewalk, where is the sidewalk located? What type of crosswalks are there? What type of treatments we have on the street for traffic calming? And look at that so we can try to create some more standardization. Same on sidewalks and for bike accommodation. So we've had a lot of conversations. We only just started adding in bike lanes in the last 3 years. People have asked us about protected bike lanes versus non-protected bike lanes. You know, DPW is still responsible for snow removal in bike lanes and in roads and on sidewalks where it's deemed a school walking route. And how do we sort of integrate all of these things together? And I think when I look at this list, this is probably several years worth of work. I don't think this is just one, you know, I don't think we could solve all these problems in a few meetings or in a year, but I really wanted to give the committee an idea of what we see that we don't have policies on right now that we think would be helpful if we did. And I know that the traffic safety committee now also hears items on a fairly regular basis, and there's certain things that seem somewhat prescriptive that they also might think that having some standardized policies on might be helpful.
I think this is a great list, Karis, thanks for putting some of these together. One thing that, and not for the sake of adding to potentially 3 years of work, and I think this is more of a lower hanging fruit, but more of a policy for what a school zone is and what that looks like within Needham. We have 6 different schools, including some of the private school zones, and every single one of them is signed differently. And I am one that the manual for uniform traffic devices, how it's a pain, but it's also, it's there for a reason, and the standardization for what a zone or a marking or something is. So we have, you know, in Pollard, we don't even have any of the lights. We just have a diamond sign that says school zone, which is actually not even a conforming sign. It's, yeah, I mean, and some of the signs are even actually conforming. We also have the non-conforming Central Ave, Sunita Williams blinking sign, school days, 20 miles an hour, which is also not allowed. So we just need to kind of maybe have if we set a policy for how then DPW would roll out a school. And I completely understand that these zones were acquired, or the signage and markings were acquired under different funding schedules. And, you know, as the school was put up, it was rolled into the, you know, the school funding, whatever is rolled into that. But I think it's important from a standardization perspective that we take a look at our signing and markings. In town. We have still dead end, we have no outlet, we have just stuff that I think we can kind of, at least we come up and we say, this is a policy for how we're going to approach this, this, and this. And I think it's something that'll be another tool for you guys to use to be able to just implement.
Can I also add to that then safety zones as well, since that's a whole new construct?
100%.
We had some standardization that was implemented. GPI had some recommendations through their study. Some of them made a lot of sense. We actually put our first safety zone in near Perry Park. But one of the recommendations they had really didn't make any sense, which was creating green shoulders that weren't bike lanes, which is not really in line with how you want to shade your bike lanes in versus other safety amenities. So I would also include that as well.
Agreed. And I would just, with speed zones and also looking into evaluating whether the town wants to, I know that after the tragedy in 2018, there was the GPI study that recommended against adopting a town-wide regulatory speed limit decrease. I think it's chapter 91A, I think it was. But the state does allow you to do a surgical approach where you could do street by street, and you know that may be a tool. I'm also not in support of a town-wide, but I would be in support of developing a policy for a surgical approach to certain roads that we reduce the de facto or the statutory speed limit to 25 instead of 30 in, you know, road by road. There are requirements to do that. There are towns that have had success in doing that. I don't think there was as much success town-wide in certain, you know, Dedham, and I think Newton's been struggling with enforcement of that. But I think we, you know, this committee, that's something that we could take a look at.
The other thing that is that there's a couple of zones. The one that sticks out in my mind the most is Highland Avenue in front of the high school, where you have a very broad stretch where no matter what you do with crosswalks, nobody is going to obey those crosswalks. So the question is, how do you get the drivers to be more mindful of that situation? To me, it's a very dangerous situation.
Shane, I think, can you add in 2 additional bullets, or an additional bulletin, which will be called large projects? Mo, when you mentioned that Highland Ave is an item that we currently have on the tip right now. And that section is part of the area. We're looking at basically everything north of Great Plain Ave to connect it to the existing project in Webster. One of the things we've challenged the town's consultant, TEC, is exactly that area. And how do you create such a, to be frank, we've talked about this, but how do you create such a slow, high alert driving environment where people can cross where they're going to cross, because you're not going to be able to channelize people or successfully channelize people to crosswalks. So you really need to get those speeds down to 10, 15 miles an hour between Rosemary and Great Plain Ave in order to have that. So they have a few things they've recommended. We've seen other items. We saw a town in England where they literally have a slalom going towards their downtown that requires you to be aware when you're making those pretty intense turns. And then when you go into the downtown, everybody sort of crosses or at the same part. So looking at those large projects, we have Highland Ave, and then we have Great Plain Ave from Linden to Warren. Also, that would be one that we'd want this committee to take a look at and make sure that it's meeting kind of the general objectives that we want to set up for mobility.
What was the second one you said there, Chris?
Downtown, Great Plain Ave from Linden to Warren.
I think Hersey has a similar issue. Much smaller scale, but I see it a lot.
It's a wide lane. So
It's a wide lane,
that's
people
what it
park
is.
and then they go to Dunkin' Donuts and then the train.
And that's something as we kind of take a look at and see what are, like, how do we insert traffic calming into our future improvements, because do we, you know, utilize horizontal shift? Or even, you know, vertical shift?
Surface.
Is that, so it's not just surfacing, we're not just, so we're looking at extra techniques of.
But I mean, rumble strips or something.
Yes, exactly, or
Not
speed tables.
Not speed bumps, but.
But speed tables might be appropriate.
And so I think that's part of what Karis and Rain and I have been talking about, is what we'd love to see this committee is. We have and Karis, what is the name of the toolkit from the state? It just slipped my
It's a
mind.
safe speeds.
Safe Speed Toolkit, but taking components out of that toolkit and formalizing some policies of when we're on this type of street. If a street meets these conditions, then these are the tools out of this toolkit that we're going to use, the rumble strips, the chicanes, and kind of standardizing some of those things so that years from now, when Karis isn't here, Rye's not here, I'm not here, or it's a brand new group, when they're having these same conversations, it doesn't get lost because we haven't memorialized somewhere where they can take that policy and just continue to update it. But I think some of those things are the things that Karis and Ryan and I have been talking about, that we'd love to see this committee help us say, okay, under these circumstances or these conditions, these are the list of tools that we will use. Doesn't mean it's always gonna be a chicane, but we can say chicane, we can say
Yeah, you need
safety zone.
You need flexibility. 'Cause
Exactly.
Every situation is
Yeah.
going to be unique in its own way.
But a list of, under these conditions, here's our list of 10 or 12 that we can pick from to utilize as part of that design and construction process.
We also
But I
need
think
to
having
try
some of that,
Sorry, we need to try some of the.
Yeah,
These things, so, you know,
absolutely.
demonstration projects and
Yeah.
things I think need to be included so we can see if they work. One, you know, something that seems extreme, but a temporary measure, see if it works. Study it,
That's a great point,
something
Tim.
we keep.
Yeah.
That's what we've
For
done
later.
with lane with, you know, a reduction of lane width.
Traffic
Started
calming.
to do- Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the cheap way to do traffic calming. It's not obviously the most ideal,
And
but it's
there's-
a way to.
And there's different things too, as we move towards complete streets, as we move towards, and we have public discussion on some of these larger projects like the downtown streetscape, those sort of things, is being able to, as we come up with conceptual plans and drawings, is go out there and mark it off with cones. You go out there, you put grabber cones so you can demonstrate to the public how we're using it. We're doing it to a degree, Tim, like, you've seen on Highland right next to Town Hall.
Sure.
We've got the orange barricade there. We've got a new one down by,
Linden.
Linden,
We have
on
the lines by-
GPA. So we're doing that to a small degree. But you're absolutely right. There are some other larger aspects we can do with grabber cones and those sort of things, just to see if it would work or if it wouldn't work, so.
and I think
Oh.
also the point of having this committee is that we as professionals can always look and say, yep, this type of treatment makes sense, but it might not fit into Needham's character. You know, we did, and I still think it was the right decision. But if you look at the intersection of Harris, Warren, and Dedham, you know, I have had people ask questions like, why did we put granite at that intersection, right? And so there's a lot of technical reasons as to why, but if it's an aesthetic question or if it doesn't fit into the nature of the community, I think there'll be resistance. So things like mini traffic circles, we've talked about doing torpedo islands, things that we've seen in neighboring communities that we know will work. Does that fit into the character of the town? And I think having this committee vet that out will help provide that backup for when we do these types of projects, because these are newer things that you haven't seen in a town like Needham before. But I would also say Justin can articulate the number of people who are complaining about speeds, traffic, and safety in the town. So I think there is a need for them, but it's like, how do we make it fit into Needham's character as opposed to, you know, fighting against what the character might be?
Well,
Paul, I think you were
character is
gonna-
also an evolving reality.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay stagnant.
But that's part of outreach too, as well. So, you know what I mean, as you.
That's how it is.
Right.
Paul, I think you wanted to say something?
Well, I was gonna ask, and pardon my ignorance on this, are there, and like, I love the idea of iteration and trying things. Are there ways to do this virtually? Are there like GIS platforms where you map the streets of town and then you can say, okay, let's put this here, simulate traffic? Is that something that exists either through consulting or?
Yes, through the design process, they have templates like bus templates, fire apparatus templates that they can overlay on top of our streets to say, hey, you can't do this for this reason because it won't allow the fire apparatus to get through there or buses to get through there. So that is part of the design phase when the engineers are doing the design. I think the key with it is taking that design, especially when it's going to be something we haven't used here in Needham before, and taking that conceptual design and putting it into exactly to your point, Tim, is putting it into a trial phase, whether that's through cones or temporary paints or just to demonstrate it now in a real world situation. Okay, it looks good on paper, it looks good in design, but is it going to work on the roadway? Because to Mo's point is educating the public on this, we have a traffic pattern change. We're changing the topography, if you will, here, the horizontal deflection. And so making people aware of that, so they just aren't driving around and all of a sudden stumble upon it and don't know what to do.
with it. So they got a new.
Or to add to that, if there's things that we don't think should be part of our toolkit, to explain why. So, we've talked about oversaturation of some of the technologies that we're using, whether it's the mile per hour signs that are those radar signs that seem to be everywhere. At what point do they become kind of white noise and no longer helping to curb speeds? RFB is the same thing. They're useful when they're used in very strategic ways, but when we tell the public, when someone comes to us and says, hey, we win an RFB, and we could say, well, here are criteria for an RFB, and here's why you do or don't meet them. Right now, we just don't have that criteria.
Good.
Karis, do you want to touch base on the current, with the downtown phase 2 design at all at this point?
Yeah, I can just give a very brief update, but essentially, we are sort of back at the drawing board as far as that project goes. We are putting out a solicitation, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, to our 5 on-call contractors who do work. For those who were not involved in town government 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the town had decided to redesign its entire downtown and do so in about 6 phases. And the 6 phases, each phase would take about 5 to 6 years in order to fund and complete. After the first phase was completed, and we then, had 5, 6 years under our belt, COVID hit, and the way that people were utilizing the downtown changed quite a bit, as well as people's feelings about things like parking and speeds through the downtown kind of shifted. The initial project was really about processing traffic as quickly as possible through the downtown. Now I think the thought is, how can we slow traffic down a little bit? And there's obviously unintended consequences for doing any of these things. So we met with the select board, and came up with some criteria for them to prioritize as far as things like pedestrian use, parking, how the traffic signals function, outdoor dining, pedestrian safety, bicycle amenities. And we got a very different list of priorities than what we probably would have come up with 10 years ago. So we're taking that list to those 5 on-call consultants and giving them a little bit of funds in order to come up with some detailed conceptuals on what they think, based on that feedback they're getting from the board, the downtown could look like. And then we'll be selecting one vendor from that process and really designing the downtown. So the conceptual is not going to be the end result of what the downtown looks like. It will go through a pretty robust process. And I imagine this committee will be one of the many committees that they will go to in order to build consensus, because a project like this is so transformative for a downtown and impacts so many people. We want to make sure that before we get too far in the process, that we're going in the right direction. But I'll tell you one thing that surprised me. We actually did our own internal survey. We did the survey with the board and internally. And initially, when we looked at the downtown and we looked at biking amenities in the downtown, we'd really been thinking about a shared bike amenity and a get on and get off the bike kind of mentality. I think some of the people in the community who are biking less as a sport and more as a transportation option, and they're biking as a family, had some concerns with that idea. As well as, I think, to be honest, the advent of e-cargo bikes has sort of changed the dynamic a little bit, because you have people who are more likely to be maybe biking through the downtown now than would have been 10 years ago. So one of the things that came up was some sort of protected bike amenity in the downtown, which again, 10 years ago, we sort of thought, nope, parking is really important. We want to make sure that that's preserved. And so that was the primary objective. So it'll be interesting to see what the what those designers and those conceptuals look like. We're hoping to have those, I think, early February at this point.
Are we going back to phase one and redesigning the phase that's already in there now?
It is possible that that may have to happen depending on what amenities we end up adding. For example, unless you end up eliminating an entire lane of traffic, I don't believe you could have a protected bike amenity on that one section. One of the things we had talked about is the majority of the costs that were associated with the phase one project were underground utility work. So we upgraded the utilities in the downtown, water, sewer, and drainage, most importantly. That was a large drainage project that occurred, and the signalization of the downtown. We believe that you could preserve the existing signals, even if you did have to change some of the curb line in order to accommodate additional amenities. So that first phase is on the table, but I don't think we have clarity yet about how much of that will end up changing. It really depends on what we end up adding or taking away from the downtown. If you end up
One
going
of
to
the-
2 lanes of traffic, you might not have to change much.
One of the things we need to be mindful of, and we were at one point, but things get lost. So we need to make sure that we're not interfering with business cycles when we do some of this work. And we may not be aware of what those cycles are, so we need to involve those businesses to find out how we're affecting them.
And that's
On the construction
Yes.
phase, yeah, I would advocate to Karis and Shane and others here that, when Wellesley did its reconstruction near, Wellesley College on 135 years ago, and pulled the sidewalks, made wider sidewalks, they did all that work in the daytime. So I used to read the Wellesley Times or whatever, went down, walked the project, talked to the vendors, talked to people down there to see what that pain is, because Needham was gonna go through it in hopefully a couple of years. A lot of angry vendors because work was being done in the daytime. I would advocate that it's warm weather work, do it outside of peak business hours. It's gonna cost more money, but the anger with the businesses was extreme.
But it's also the calendar. I mean, when I first got involved in this issue, we had scheduled a major work project on Chapel Street, right in the middle of peak Christmas shopping. And we blew out some of the businesses. I don't think they failed as a result of that, but we certainly cost them a lot of income.
it's I think it all goes back to that education as well, and to Kara's point with through this phase, the design phase, having the consultant that we select come and present it to mobility, that we would definitely get JP involved as well, our new economic development. We definitely have JP heavily involved with this, and we would definitely want to pull in some of the business folks to maybe 1 or 2 representatives that would represent the businesses and help communicate that design and work that we're doing, as well as the construction, to be very cognitive of the fact that we don't want to do it in a silo and then the businesses wondering, why weren't they notified? And so it's a very good point.
Yeah, so when downtowns like that, the way the contracts could be structured, and this committee should influence, is look, and with other committees, groups, talking with businesses, how we structure the contracts to phase that work in. You want it to be pretty much usable to the public during business hours. That's tough, right? So that's like, right, that's more.
Hours and cycle.
And when they open it up in the daytime, have it safe. So that all has to be brought in. And Wellesley couldn't go down the sidewalks. It was tough as a physically fit person, never mind if you're a senior citizen. And it was left that way for quite a while, as if they over constructed and then would come back. And so how does that work? You bite off a bit, you make it safe, you do the work, you keep biting. It costs more money.
Right.
But you get support and it's appropriate. And where that is has to be discussed out between all groups.
Yeah.
So with that, I think the last, and I apologize, the first time I've ever had to do an organizational meeting of a new committee. So my plan was to have a chair and vice chair today, elected, and then try to set up at least a couple meetings, throughout the year. If not, a schedule of what makes sense for this group. So I guess my first question would be, is anyone interested in chairing this committee?
I would probably throw my hat in the ring.
I would support that, given the overlap with the TMAC. So, I would nominate Justin to that role.
Want to see if there's any.
A second?
No, anyone, I mean, yeah, this is, anyone else, I want to give an opportunity for anyone else who.
Yeah, I mean,
Has
this is my,
anything to
this is
say.
my first committee, right? So I don't think it's appropriate to take a leadership position.
Jump right- You're just jumping right in, Paul.
Yeah. So accept the nomination.
Yes. Do we get to vote or
I
just
don't think you need to.
don't need to, right? I think it's fantastic that you're able to, and with your knowledge, skill and background with TSC and all the other work that you do in the research, that'll help move us forward.
So that leaves us with the vice
Vice
chair.
Put my hat in the ring.
I'll support that.
Second,
Second.
third.
Absolutely.
So I got a Justin as the chair and Tim as the vice chair.
Excellent. So I was hoping that we could meet at least once a month was sort of my my hope. I didn't know if for everyone here, is there a better day of the week, a better time that we could just set up a reoccurring meeting? So right now we're meeting on the 4th Monday at 5:30. Does that happen to work better for everyone? I know many of you are on other committees that meet at other times.
Works for me. I think keeping it to an hour is useful.
And let me just make sure that's not a holiday in December, because it could very well be.
And is 5:30 something that everyone
That's fine.
is okay with?
You're saying
It's the
fourth
25th in
one?
December,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
So I was gonna say for December, do we want to meet or could we meet on the 18th?
I can't meet that week at all. But I can miss a meeting.
I think around the holidays is not gonna be productive, really.
I mean, I'm available, but to Mo's point,
We're looking at the 18th or Christmas
because
Day.
I have off that whole week, but
I'm away the third week, whatever that is.
that's the third week.
That's the
One to the
18th.
third week.
So do we want to kick this into January, but maybe not do it on that third week? Maybe is there another, I don't know what works for other people's. First of all, does the day work? And so that's, so
Monday is usually okay.
Mondays is an okay time. So do we feel, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done, so I technically, I don't want to like have our other meeting on the 22nd of January. Which one, hold on, third week would be the 15th.
That's an.
And that's an MLK, and I know, yeah, that's, you know,
Although I don't know if the holiday goes into the evening.
but that's the like. a
We
weekend.
can't meet that day. I don't think we
Yeah.
legally can meet that day.
Stuff like, yeah,
Okay.
but, let me see here.
Would the 8th work?
8th is good because you've not had the meeting in December, so
The 8th would
that
work,
kind of catches
Yep,
everything
the 8th
up.
would work for me.
Me too.
January.
I'm just gonna ask that on Mondays, if we're meeting at 5:30, I might be remote most of the time because I'm on childcare pickup. My husband works later that day. If we meet at 7, I can come in, but I'm happy to be remote if that's an option. I just don't want people to think that I'm not looking forward to seeing your faces in person, but that's sort of my situation.
No, that's perfectly understandable, Alex, and yeah, because I have also, you know, logistical.
We're all juggling.
Yeah, well, it's all, everyone has their juggling, and yes, we would still operate as a hybrid type meeting. Unless people are okay with, you know, doing it at 7, which is, for me, is like a typical meetings that I have are like at 7, because I have TMAC on Wednesdays and at 7. But I have no problem. For me, this was a little bit of an odd time 5:30 for a meeting, but if it works with everybody, I can,
7's fine, me too.
7 okay with you?
Sure. Sure.
And Alex, that would work for you?
Yeah, that would work for me.
Would that work for you?
Yes.
So
And is that-
you're here on, you're gonna be here on January.
That's a good point. Ended December,
I
end of
think- I
January.
think- it was in the minutes
Anytime
already.
works for Rain right now.
How come
Yeah.
it ain't got-
Karis, would that work for you?
Yeah, that works fine.
You can change, all right.
If we can keep it to an hour, that would help.
Yeah, we're gonna, yes.
Yep.
Yes, and I'll work on, we just kind of we'll come in, we'll stick to the agenda, get the work we need to do, and then, figure out, what work needs to be done in the meantime, and we'll,
Right.
So would we
Now,
look,
it is Elvis's birthday, but I think we could handle.
I've never celebrated that, so.
so Justin, looking at having it on the second Monday of January, which is the 8th, would we want to just keep the second Monday of each month? That would put us at February 12th for the next meeting.
I have a regular meeting on the second Mondays typically,
Okay.
which I don't mind being late to, if it works for everybody else.
And is that
And is that what the
February?
7 o'clock start, Mo?
Yeah, well, I have a Democratic Town Committee meets on the second Monday. I can be late to that meeting. I'm certainly not a key part of that committee. So
7 PM.
7 is
Mhm.
fine. I can do it.
Okay.
Sorry,
So
which
we'll
date
just-
are we at now?
February,
That would be February 12th, yeah.
so we're saying the
Thank you.
second Monday of each month from 7 to 8 PM.
Okay.
So that makes us, would be the same date. No, one,
March would be the 11th,
yeah.
Yeah.
Youth leap year.
April would be the 8th. May would be the 13th,
Probably town meeting.
and June would be the 10th.
I think maybe
we-
we'll skip it in May then.
Yeah, I skipped TMAC in May because of,
Yeah.
yeah.
I won't be there in April, but I'll tell you in March.
Yeah, and we can, whatever may, if there's a scheduling conflict for a lot of us, we can certainly, on the, the meeting before, if we need to adjust, we can certainly adjust a time or a day, but we'll try to keep on sticking to that second Monday of every month as our normal cadence, until we need to adjust. I think our charter is 2 times or 4 times a year, so we'll hit the quota for that.
I think just once a year, isn't it?
It was, I helped draft the charter of this, so I forget, we did a couple different iterations of it, I forget what we ended up finally keying out on. There was another committee that talked about formation of this committee.
Yeah, we have like the master committee that's meeting twice a year, and I think technically
right.
this committee, like in theory, once we get all the policies in place, we won't have to meet that often because we'll just be tweaking things. And the goal was that in the fall and the spring, we would have a big meeting of transportation safety, this committee, and any other person who wants to attend, where we could talk in detail. The fall would be about our capital plan. So what are we planning to do for the upcoming financial year? And then we would do one late winter, early spring to talk about the actual construction we anticipate for that year.
Good. So, as I guess is my, was that, Karis, do you have anything else on for this? So I
No,
guess
we're good
as
for
the
today.
first motion I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
So moved, Mo, seconded? Second, all right, second, so we all in favor?
Aye.
We stand
Aye.
adjourned. Thanks, Al.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.